Hello, I'm Coraline Sexton, and I'm the program coordinator here at the Weyburn Public Library. Today we have a special guest with us, a local author and artist, Jan Keating, and she's going to join us today and just to discuss her new released book that she has written, and we'll get to know her a little bit more. So Jan, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Coraline. I appreciate it.
Yes, it's a great honor to have you. While we begin, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself? And you have, did you grow up here or?
Yes, I was born and raised in Weyburn, and I went to school here, graduated from WCI, and I always wanted to pursue a career in art or in interior design or fashion design. And my mother was not for that at all. She discouraged me, which was rather odd when I think of it, because my mother was very artistic and very creative herself and very musical, talented singer, but she just didn't give much credence and credit to anything in the arts. I think she thought you should have your feet planted firmly on the ground, and so I followed in her footsteps and went to business college and got my diploma at SciAst, and was working in office work for years, and was a desktop publisher for SaskPower at the end of my career. So then I met my husband, and we've been married for 52 years, and we moved away shortly after we were married, moved to Estevan for a few years, and then on to Saskatoon, and then made a full circle back here to Weyburn, and my husband went into business for himself with his brother-in-law. They had a partnership, and they had two implement dealerships, one in Estevan and one in Weyburn. And we had our first child, Tara, was born in Saskatoon, and we moved back here just after she was born. And our second daughter, Trana, was born here, and both our daughters are artists, and both of them write. Trana is an actress in Toronto and a playwright. She's written 2 plays, and she won awards for both of them. And she's also an artist. And Tara, that lives here in Weyburn, is a graphic designer.
Okay.
That was what her training was. And she's an artist, and she presently works for the Water Corporation. And she has a little store in the mall called Vintage Finds and Fabrics.
Right.
And so when my husband retired, we moved to the lake, and we live at Kenosee Lake, and that's our full-time residence. And in our summers we spend at the lake, and winters we spend in California. We have a home in California.
Great. So yeah, that's wonderful to hear your background and where you have come from today. So today we actually are celebrating about you have released a new book that you have written, and called The Prairie Girl Living in Baghdad. Could you tell us about that, a little bit more about that?
The book, I'll give you a synopsis of the story. The book is about Sarah Powell, who was born here in Weyburn in 1908. Her father was the bank manager for the Weyburn Security Bank, and they moved here from the United States, and they had 6 children. Sarah, that was the youngest, and she was the only one that was born in Canada.
Okay.
So the other 5 were they had them before they came here. And she went to school at Soar School and graduated from Weyburn Collegiate and went on to university in the United States. And while she was in university, this was in the 1920s when she was in university, she met and fell in love with this Arab Muslim man. and his name was Dr. Mohammed Fidel Al-Jamali. That's a big handle.
That is.
Yeah. And so she, against her parents' wishes, she moved to Baghdad and married this dark stranger. And it's funny, but my piano teacher, Helen Davidson, lived to be 103. And so I knew that she knew the family, and I asked her, what did people in the community think when Sarah decided to go off to Baghdad and marry this dark stranger? And she said, oh, the tongues were wagging. So that's a little side.
Right.
But back to the synopsis. So they marry, and they have 3 sons. Laith is the firstborn, and he suffered encephalitis, and so his mental development was arrested at age 5.
Okay.
And Sarah tried to balance things in her life between raising a sick child and 2 other little boys, and supporting her husband during his career. She also worked outside the home. She was the head of the English department at the university in Baghdad.
Okay.
So she was highly educated and very capable. And her husband was the Director General to the Ministry of Education when they were first married. And he went on from that position to become General Director of Foreign Affairs. And eventually he rose to the position of Prime Minister of Iraq.
Okay.
So this book delves into their life and the struggles and challenges that she had to meet with this very sick boy that she was raising. There was no place at that time for boys or children like this. There were no special schools or places for them. And in 1958, there was a coup d'etat, and there was a military revolution against the government, and her husband was imprisoned and sentenced to death. And I can't tell you any more, or I'd be giving away the rest of the story.
Yeah. You want us to be intrigued. It sounds very interesting. I'm very interested in it. I'll have to read it myself.
Yeah, I hope you will.
Yes. So what inspired you then to write about Sarah?
Okay, that's an interesting story in itself. About 10 years ago, in 2010, I decided that I wanted to have an art show. And I approached the Alley Griffin Gallery and the Weyburn Arts Council, and I got involved with facilitating an art show that would be for women like myself who had been born and raised in Weyburn, but had never had a showing of their art in Weyburn.
Okay.
Now, I found women across Canada that came from Weyburn. All of them, or I should say some of them, were very well established in their art and had shown in galleries and had many art shows, but none of us had ever had a showing in Weyburn. So that was the thrust of that art show. One of the artists that came to that that I invited was Janice Eaglesham.
Okay.
Janice Eaglesham was born and raised in Weyburn. Her father was Doc Eaglesham, Fergus Eaglesham. And one of the paintings that Janice submitted was a painting of the Powell House.
Okay.
And I said to her, well, what's the significance of this beautiful picture that you've painted? And she said, well, that's the Powell House. And I said, the Powell House? Oh. She said, well, yeah, it's a historical house in Weyburn. And Janice grew up on the South Hill where in the Eaglesham home, and it's also a historical home. And she was a neighbor to the Powell family. Not she wasn't. They were before her time, but her family was, yeah. So I was interested and I was intrigued because I thought, well, this is a historical home and a historical family, and I really don't know anything about them. I've lived all my life in Weyburn, and I should know more about this. And so I started doing some research, and I thought to myself, this would make a fantastic musical play, or some kind of a community production should be done with this story. And so that was kind of my original thoughts, but I couldn't seem to find anybody that was interested in writing the play or making a production. And so it just kind of got tabled. And
Okay.
I didn't have any intentions of writing the book myself, but that was the seed that was planted. And when I was retired and still had not found anybody that wanted to write the story, and I would tell the story to many people,
Right.
anybody that I thought was interested in writing a book. But you know, you have to have the passion for the story. And obviously I had the passion for the story. And so I decided this was a time in my life where I should tackle it. And I had some writing skills because, as I mentioned earlier, when I worked for Sarah Powell for the government, I was a desktop publisher.
Okay.
So I was a typist, and I was familiar with word processing, and I had some basic writing skills that I felt I could at least tackle a project, you know.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I love that. I love that story. That, and I'm glad you did pursue that, because I do find that, you know, there are a lot of, I didn't realize, I had never heard of the Powell House either, and I've grown up here as well. So,
and I think that that's my main purpose for the book, is that I want to leave a little something for Weyburn about Weyburn's historical house and the family that lived in it. And I think that we need to pay attention to the past so that we know where we're going in the future. And I just think that it's something we need to preserve, and we need to share, and we need to get the stories out about our own community and people that came from this community. We have a lot of important, interesting people that grew up here.
yes.
You know, W.O. Mitchell, Tommy Douglas, Irene Salemka.
Yes,
you know.
we have several, so that's great. So what, then, you might have already touched on this, so what was the highlight then of writing this book?
Well, the highlight, I think, for me with this book was definitely finding two of Sarah's sons and a niece of hers. And I think before the interview started, I was mentioning that I was looking for this book that Sarah had written, The Story of Leith and His Life After Encephalitis. And I found a lady in Scotland. I had searched 10 years ago. I started looking for the book, and then dropped it, and then picked up again. Still couldn't find it. And I eventually found this woman, Dr. Monica Spooner, in Scotland, and got in touch with her, and she had copies of the book. And not only that, but she said to me, I'm a friend of the family. I'm a personal friend of the family. And she said, two of Sarah's sons are still living. She said, and I'm in touch with them frequently. Would you like to be put in touch with them? And I said, oh,
wow.
Yes, would I ever?
Yes.
I mean, you know, that was like the gift of all gifts, to have that fall into your lap as a writer. But I wasn't sure. She said, I'm sure they'll be interested to know that what your interest is in writing about their mother. And I said, yeah. And then I thought, I hope they approve of me writing about their mother. And so I had exchanged some emails, and then one of the sons, Abbas, he's the younger of the two. Usama is the oldest. He's 85. He lives in Kuwait. Abbas is 77, and he lives in Jordan.
Okay.
And Abbas has a daughter by the name of Fatima, and Fatima arranged for us to do a Facebook video meeting.
Oh, right.
You know, it's like Zoom, but it was through Facebook.
Right.
And So we had a face-to-face meeting, got to see what we looked like,
Oh,
each other, and
nice.
my husband also sat in on this interview. And Fatima asked me, she said, now Jan, what is your intent with this book before we go any further?
Mm-hmm.
Like after the introductions were over. And so I said, well, my intention is to try to pay tribute to Sarah and to try to establish her as a historical figure from our community of Weyburn.
Right.
And I want to pass this story on to the people of the community and share her story because I think it's a very interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
So they were okay with that, and I seemed to, I guess, pass the test, and
Good.
and they trusted me to write the story, and they were very open about sharing with me, and also through my research, I just landed on, this is the wonderful thing about computers at your fingertips. I had been typing in the Powell name, and one of the things that popped up was a genealogy place in Massachusetts, and they had a wealth of information there, but it was all cataloged in box and whatnot, and I thought, well, where do I even begin? But luckily, someone who worked there sent me an email with the name of this lady who is a family member of the Powell family.
Oh.
And her name is Mary Elizabeth Powell Polglaze. That's another big long handle, but it's shortened up to Betsy. She lets me call her Betsy.
Okay.
And so I got in touch with Betsy in Massachusetts, and she is also in her 80s and extremely brilliant. I mean, a lot of 80-year-old people don't have much to do on a computer, but
Mm-hmm.
she has been on her computer and she has been working for years and has a wealth of genealogy records. And she opened up to me and made me a guest on her website so that I could go in and search out all the family history. She said, help yourself, Jan, to anything you want. There's photos there, there's stories, there's dates, there's census records.
That's great.
So again, I hit pay dirt. Like, how many writers who are starting out on a project like this get the gift of direct contact with family and all this information?
Right, yes. It was obviously meant to be the right timing.
I think so.
Yes. Oh, that's wonderful to hear. And so, you've also, this is not your first book that you have written.
Right.
You have written another one, and it is based on another local story here as well. Can you touch on that for us?
Sure. So, A Normal Boy Living in an Asylum is based on or is inspired by a true story that actually did happen, and it started out in the 1930s, the dirty 30s. This little farm boy, I gave him the name Donald, was born on a farm near Weyburn, and his father was killed tragically, and his mother didn't have the wherewithal to run the farm, the family farm, on her own. She had 4 children, 3 girls and a son, and they had a hired hand, and his name was Frank in my book. That's not his real name. And so she took up with Frank, and they decided to get married, but Frank had conditions, and he promised that he would look after her and run the farm for her, and she wouldn't have to worry about things. But the condition was that she had to get rid of her children. He did not like children, and they were not going to be part of this plan. So the 3 daughters were older than Donald, and they found places to go working as domestics on farms and whatnot. And the story focuses on Donald. And so what they do with Donald is they take him to the Weyburn Mental Hospital. He's 9 years old.
Oh.
And they drop him off. And this is probably the late 30s now, early 40s.
Okay.
And they never see him again. Like they just drop him off. At that time, there was no visitors allowed.
Okay.
And so when you took somebody and had them committed, that was it. They didn't, no phone calls. Letters would be monitored, any mail that went out and any mail that came in. So this little boy, they tell him they're taking him to a summer camp, and that there'll be lots of little boys for him to play with, and that he'll be on a farm. And so the story is about his life in the asylum and the hardships and the challenges that he faces, the abandonment, the feeling of abandonment by his mother. There's terrible things that happen to him in there, and there's also some very good things that happen that he realizes later turned out to be good. And so then the story goes on about his life, and it's a book of, I would say, courage, love, forgiveness. Forgiveness is a big thing that is addressed.
Right. Well, that sounds like another good book to read. So where can readers find out more about you or your books?
Well, I have my own website because maybe some people don't know that I am an artist as well.
Right.
And so I have a website, and they can either just Google my name, Art by Jan Keating, or they can find me at jankeating.com.
Okay.
And that'll take you to my website. But the books are available on Amazon.ca for Canada.
Okay.
They're also available in the United States and many other countries around the world. So it's through Amazon. And when if they type in the title of the book or even just my name, it'll do a search and it'll bring up the books. And when the books come up, if you want, you can click on the picture of the cover, and it says, take a look inside or something like that.
Right.
So it allows you to go in and read some pages of the book to see if you're interested in it.
Right. Okay. And then are you also on social media besides your website?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram, and I don't do Twitter. I've tried all that, but it's sort of like not of great interest to me. So,
okay.
But I am on Facebook.
So they could look you up on Facebook?
Yeah.
All right. So I just have a few kind of fun questions here. We are celebrating Saskatchewan Library Week. And just thought I'd ask, what was your favorite book when you were a kid?
Well, that would have to be Anne of Green Gables by Lucy
classic.
Maud Montgomery. And I read all of them, and I never thought when I was a little girl reading those books that one day my daughter would be on a TV series called Anne with an E. And so yeah, it was. I loved the way she wrote.
Yeah, I really like her books as well. So then, what is your favorite book or story that you have read as an adult?
Well, I don't really have a favorite, but one that does come to mind that I'll share with you that I like is the one Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt.
Okay.
And the reason that one stands out to me is because of the way he wrote the dialect in the Irish Limerick accent. He had a way of really making me actually hear the characters speaking. And so that book comes to mind because that is one of the things I tried to do in both of my books. And especially in this one, because the one about Sarah is more of a biography, and I didn't want it to be flat with just dates and places and times and events. I wanted the characters to come out of the page at you, and I wanted to breathe life into them. And the only way I know to do that really is through their dialogue.
Okay.
So that's why that book, Frank McCourt's Angela's Ashes, really struck me, because I could visualize what he was describing, and I could hear the characters speaking. And I saw the movie after the book came out, and a lot of times when you read the book first, you don't care for the movie.
Right.
But I thought the movie was bang on with the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. At this time, would you like to maybe read a little bit out of a Prairie Girl, out of
Sure.
Sarah's book there?
As I mentioned earlier, Sarah was looking for a school for Laith, a special place for him, because there wasn't anything in the Middle East for children who were mentally handicapped. And Laith was getting older, and he was getting more difficult for Sarah to manage. And I won't delve on that too much, but just to give you some backdrop for what I'm going to read. So she's finally found a school in Scotland. She had to go out of the Middle East. This is how determined she was. She finally finds a school in Scotland for him, and she's going to have to leave him there and go back to Baghdad. So she says, "Son, come here. I have to go home now for a time." She smiled at him. "Home? I come too?" Laith looked up at Sarah. Laith's speech was often limited to single words or short phrases. "No, you will have to stay here at your new school, and you will learn many new things here. You're going to learn carpentry and farming. Won't that be great fun?" "Yes, carpentry. Drive a tractor," Laith expressed with excitement. Laith still loved tractors and any type of animal. Sarah hoped this opportunity would give him great pleasure in the days ahead. "All right, darling, let's have a hug and a kiss." Sarah bent down and embraced Laith and held him close just long enough to hold him without crushing him and scaring him with her last embrace. She didn't want to let go, but letting go was what this was all about. She had to let him go, to be with the people who might be able to give him something that she could not. She had to let go so she could return to Fidel, Usama, and Abbas. They needed her too. She stood up and patted Laith on the top of his head and turned with a little wave and made her way out. Her eyes blurred with tears as she walked away from the school. She had a 2-hour wait at the train station in Edinburgh. It was Sunday evening, and she knew there was a church near the station. As it was time for the evening service, Sarah decided to go into the church. She was feeling very sad and alone and thought being in church might give her some comfort. She took a seat in the pew near the back of the church to be inconspicuous as possible. She had been praying every day and asking God for guidance. She felt He had guided her to the right school, and she would give a little prayer of thanks. She was feeling very emotional and was already missing her son. As soon as the music began to play, her eyes welled up with tears, and she wept silently through all the hymns, the sermon, and the prayers. The tears just kept falling. Even though she knew people were looking at her with sympathy, she couldn't stop the tears from flowing. She was thankful that no one approached her, and she escaped without drawing further attention. She dried her eyes and returned to the station. This was the saddest day of her life. Had she done the right thing? Yes, she knew in her mind it was the right thing, and especially the right thing for Laith. As painful as parting was for her, she loved her child enough to want to give him an opportunity to learn to be independent of her. She could not live with him every day and continue putting him in an empty room every time he had a tantrum. His physical strength was already almost more than she was able to manage. Keeping him with her would only make things more difficult for him when she became too old to care for him. She had to talk to herself about this as she made her journey home. Other people in Europe sent their young children away to boarding schools all the time. This would be like that, she reasoned with herself. She would visit Laith as soon as possible and as often as possible. Her reasoning made sense, but her heart wasn't listening to her mind. She prayed that time would be a healer, and she prayed that Laith would be able to cope with his new home and that the staff there would be able to cope with him as well. She prayed that his endearing qualities would outshine any of his shortcomings. She hoped others would learn to like him, even if they could never love him as she did.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, she had quite a lot on her plate, and a lot tugging at the heartstrings, because she had this boy that she loved so much, and she put so much energy into trying to help him to learn. And you know, he was a normal child for 5 years, and then he was sick, and he lost a lot of ground, and she was always striving to give him as much of his true self back as she could, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. Now I'm more interested in. Definitely have to try to read that. Well, I think that's all I have today to ask you. But was there anything else that you would like to let our patrons know, or like to tell us about?
Well, just that if they are interested in getting the book, and they can borrow a copy here at the library, or they can order it and have a copy sent within a couple of days through Amazon. And my daughter, Tara, does have some books on the shelf in her store in the Weyburn Mall at Vintage Finds and Fabrics. And the supply is limited, and I prefer that people order the copies themselves, but I can get shipments in, and I am going to try to make them available at the store.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you again, Jan, for joining me today. And we're hoping to have people in person, but of course during the pandemic we're not able to do that today. But we just thank you that you could come and share us a little bit more about your books and about yourself.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I hope your readers will enjoy the book, and I hope you'll enjoy the book when you get a chance to read it.
Hopefully.
And that's one more thing. If readers do order it on Amazon and would go on there after they read it and do a book review, it helps the author, and it helps for the sale of books. It helps to promote the book.
Okay.
So, and it can be short. It can be as short as one sentence, just a little something about what they liked about the book.
Right. Oh, great. That's good to know.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.